everybody. Welcome to TED Talk once again. It's Monday, August the 17th, and we're here in Phoenix. I'm here with my partner in crime over here. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Another nice jacket.
You know, it's recycled. I've used this one before, but it's one of my favorites, so I thought, you get what you get, audience.
I can't wait for today's guest. We've sailed from Southampton to New York and over that famous spot. But just check out this video of today's guests.
The supposedly unsinkable ship collided with an iceberg on its maiden voyage in April 1912. It went down with the loss of more than 1,500 lives. Well, over the years, expeditions have recovered thousands of items, including jewellery and clothing. But they're also thought to have caused the wreck to deteriorate. Well, now the ship is being given special protection under a new international treaty signed by the UK and the US. And with me now to discuss is world-leading Titanic expert Tim Maltin. World-leading Titanic expert. I want that title.
A lot of people don't realise, when they think of the Titanic as the biggest ship in the world, they perhaps don't realise that she was the middle sister of a planned trio of ships. It was going to be the Olympic, the Titanic and the Gigantic. And what happened was that the Olympic was launched very successfully, and then she had an accident, in fact, where Captain Smith, who liked going very fast, he was trying to race a Royal Navy vessel out of Southampton called the HMS Hawke, and the huge power of Olympic sucked the Hawke into the side of Olympic, and her ram went through the hull of Olympic underwater, and Olympic started to fill with water, and magnets were automatically released and the heavy doors slammed down and Olympic was saved. And this is one of the reasons why people felt so safe on Olympic and Titanic. Olympic had damage to her propellers from that, and so she had to go into Belfast for emergency repairs. But Titanic was being completed in Belfast at the same time, and there was only one dock, the Tonson engraving dock, that was the largest in the world, and it was the only dock big enough to take these ships. So Titanic, her building had to be delayed, and this photograph here shows Titanic being warped out of her fitting out basin, and it shows the Olympic actually coming into that basin to take that space. And if that hadn't happened, Titanic would have sailed in March as planned, and there wouldn't have been any ice on the sea track.
So that collision caused that collision.
That's exactly right.
And really quickly, what took people so long to find the ship?
That's right. Well, the Atlantic's very, very big, and although the Titanic was the biggest ship in the world, she's a tiny speck. And in fact, the way Ballard found her was not by finding the actual hull of Titanic. What he found was what's called the debris field. So as she kited down to the ground over those 2 miles, it left a big trail, and they came in along there.
Well, it ended there. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So interesting.
Wow.
Can't wait for today. Welcome to the show, Tim Maltin. How are you, mate?
Thanks, guys. Great to be on. Thanks very much indeed for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on here. We're very excited about this. We sailed once from Southampton to New York. I think we sailed over the spot. At least they told us, and we slowed down very, very slow. I remember from that night that the ocean was like glass, and thinking to myself, boy, you can't see anything. So if there was an iceberg there, you would hit it. But I know we're going to find out much more about it. We're going to start off TED Talk, as we do always, with 3 of Nick's random questions, finding out a little bit more about you, Tim.
Absolutely. All right, Tim, first question for you. If you could take over as CEO of one company, which one would it be?
Well, it might be a bit predictable for me to say this, but I think it might have to be Amazon at the moment. I know that Mr. Bezos is making lots of money, but it's a very interesting business. And obviously, I'd like to be nice to all the people that are working all the way down the chain of production on that. And I think it could be a business that can develop even more in the future. And of course, with COVID, everyone's in their homes. So I think that delivery businesses are the way forward.
Without a doubt. I love that answer.
Definitely.
Everyone's using Amazon. When the Amazon driver drives up to our house with a parcel now, his sat-nav or GPS says, "Hi, welcome home." He's there that much.
Very good, very good.
All right, number 2. If you suddenly gained psychic abilities, what would be the first thing you'd find out about the future, other than the end of COVID?
Well, I think I'd quite like to know when we're going to have driverless cars, okay? Because people talk about that being scary, but I think we're actually quite close to being able to have driverless cars now. And I'd like to know if it's going to be in 2 years or 10 years or 100 years. But I'm betting within 10 years we might all be having driverless cars.
That'd be cool. That would be really cool. My dad needs that.
Well, let's clarify. So Tim, I have halfway to a driverless. I drive a Tesla, so it does drive me down the freeway.
There we are.
It drives on the freeway down my home. However, I do know, living in Phoenix and having lived in LA, that right now I settle for driverless cars instead of driver cars because I'd probably do a better job.
Absolutely right. You'd probably be safer with a computer than with a person out there.
Definitely.
All right, and number 3, if you could wedgie anybody in the world, who would it be?
It would be that person that let out COVID-19 from that lab in China. I want to find them and wedgie them.
Well, they were
Hey,
interesting.
you.
Yeah. Don't need that back.
Oh, God.
Anyway, we're here with Tim Maltin. Tim is we're going to find out what Tim is, actually. I was going to say an expert on the Titanic, but I think there's so many things about that incredible thing that happened back in the early last century. But Tim, tell us a little bit about what it is you actually, what you do, what you've studied, and how you've come to the conclusions you have done today.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot. Well, some of your viewers might remember a great book about the Titanic called A Night to Remember that was also made into a fantastic black and white film, if any of your viewers are old enough to remember black and white films.
Yeah.
But that was called A Night to Remember, and I got into that when I was about 7 years old. And then after that, I started reading some survivor accounts, and my uncle was actually taught maths by Lawrence Beasley, who survived the Titanic in second class. So he was my uncle, when he was very young, was taught maths by a very ancient Lawrence Beasley. So there was kind of a direct connection there. And my uncle had Beasley's book. So I read Beasley's book, who's a very famous survivor of the Titanic. And then that got me into other first-hand accounts. So I read Lightoller, I read Gracie. And for your viewers listening to this now, the best way into Titanic is actually through the people who were there. And what I've done is sort of nerded out, if you like, and kind of read everything that everyone who was there said. So I like to think that I can really pass on a bit of information from people that were actually eyewitnesses to the sinking of the Titanic.
Wow. I don't even know where to start. It's incredible.
I know where you should start.
Go on, where do you want to start?
Your favorite story of Dawson.
So yeah, there's so many stories, and actually you might be able to clarify if any of these are actually true. But I did hear one story that after the movie was made, the James Cameron movie, which I thought was sensational. I don't know how accurate it is. Maybe you can comment on that in a while. But I'd heard that after the movie. Someone went digging around, not literally, searching around the cemetery in North America, and actually found a gravesite of somebody called Jack Dawson that was on the Titanic. Is that true?
I think that is true, actually. Shoot me down in flames if it turns out not to be. But it does seem correct when you think that 1,500 people lost their lives on the Titanic, and it's highly likely that when they were drafting the film, they came up with a name which actually, resonated from the passenger list. But one of my favourite stories is that, in fact, what we have to remember is that it was actually very brave to get into the first lifeboats which left Titanic, and most people didn't want to do that. In fact, many of the women in first class, when the lifeboats were first opened, they would not go in them until their husbands and people like that had actually said that they would go in with them. So in fact, what you had at the beginning of the sinking was men were allowed into the lifeboats, and it was only as the ship tipped up more and more and you got a bit more panic that women were then only allowed with children into the boat. But the point about my story is, as one of the first class passengers was climbing up, a woman up the big main staircase towards the lifeboats, she had on her the most precious thing she had, which was an ivory and gold miniature of her mother, a piece of jewelry with an image of her mother on it. And what she did was, because she was getting into a lifeboat, she met her friend called Edward Kent, who was a man on the Titanic who had to stay with the ship. And she said, I want you to look after this because I'm going off in the lifeboats. And of course, anything could happen to me, but you're staying on this very safe Titanic. So I'm going to give you this so I don't take it in the lifeboat with me. So he put it in his pocket. She then escaped Titanic in a lifeboat, and she was rescued and saved in a ship called the Carpathia. Very sadly, Edward Kent stayed on Titanic and drowned, and then later on, his body was recovered, and in his pockets, they found the miniature of this lady's grandmother, and it was returned to her. So she did get the miniature back, but it had gone via someone who drowned on the Titanic in their pocket.
Oh my gosh.
That's amazing. Whew. There's so many. We went on the Queen Mary a while ago. I think it was from New York to Southampton, and there was a lecturer on there talking about. There's another story he told. So I want to ask you this: the story went, and I may not have the details right, but the story, he showed a map of Southampton back in the early 1900s with the like an aerial view of the town, and then he showed another one with cross marks on the houses where apparently people lived who had perished in Titanic. A lot of people from that town, and the story goes, so he said, which was similar to the movie, that someone had got drunk in a bar, fell asleep on the floor, had his ticket taken from him. So that guy went on the ship. He left town embarrassed because back then it was an embarrassing thing, and the ship sank. 3 weeks later, he came back to the town because he couldn't bear the thought of being away from his mum, and his mum thinking he had perished. And he knocked on the door, and his mum was there, and she fainted, and so on. But the story goes that that happened, and that the person who had his ticket, he's listed as someone who perished on the ship, but he didn't. The person who stole his ticket actually perished.
Well, that would make sense, because that's how they would know who was on the ship and who wasn't. In fact, to this day, we don't know exactly how many people were on the Titanic, and to this day, we don't know exactly how many people survived, because it's so difficult when you're doing administration like that, with people getting sick and not sailing, or, as you say, people swapping tickets, things like that, that we're still to this day not absolutely sure who did die on Titanic and who did survive.
Wow, and 1,500 people. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely. Have you visited?
It's crazy, and there were whole streets in Southampton where, as you quite rightly said, there were whole streets where every family had a relative who drowned on Titanic, because it was a great privilege to sail in Titanic, because there was a strike at the time, and a lot of the ships were laid up. So if you were really good and you wanted work, you could get work on the Titanic, but they had the pick of everyone at the time. So it's only the very best crew that actually managed to make it onto Titanic. And then, of course, very sadly, it was those best people that were all wiped out in tragedy.
Oh my God.
Amazing. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk about the book. I know there's a book, 101 Things You Don't Know About the Titanic. I think there's more than 101 things that I don't know.
Well, we just said two more, so just bump that up to 103.
103. We'll be back after the break. We'll see you then.
Life is a journey, and everybody's going somewhere. Why wait for the fun to start when you reach your destination? With TAD Travel, the fun starts the moment you leave your door, wherever you're going, and however you want to get there. We've got it covered. TAD Travel. We're going places. Are you coming with us?
So we're back again with part two. I'm here with Nick and special guest Tim Maltin. So we're going to talk about the book. Now, let me try and get this title right. 101 things you thought you knew about the Titanic but didn't.
That's it.
Look
Perfect.
at that.
That's exactly right.
100 and things.
Exactly. So, Tim, tell us about it. First of all, how did you come up with the title and the idea of the book? And let us know some of these 101 things we thought we knew.
Well, I kept hearing about, Captain Smith was drunk, and then I realised that I knew from the testimonies that he never touched drink when he was at sea. And then they said the rudder was too small. But I knew that Titanic's rudder was the same size as her sister ship Olympic's rudder. And I knew that she steered so well that she was actually the only ship to actually sink a German submarine in the First World War. She was the only merchant ship to do so. So it wasn't that. Then I heard people say, well, the rivets were weak. And and that's White Star were trying to save money. But then I realised that actually Harland and Wolff were paid 5% on top of what they spent, so there was no incentive to save money. And what I learned was that the rivets, although it's true that the rivets did break, the heads all snapped off as the iceberg went down the ship, but that was just because the rivets were the weakest part of a very, very strong structure. It wasn't because the rivets themselves were defective. So I kept looking at all these things that people said caused the sinking of the Titanic, and I realized that it wasn't that. So I wanted to really list out all the things people thought they knew but actually didn't, because what they thought they knew was wrong, and then start to get into actually what really did cause the sinking of the Titanic.
Wow. That's so cool.
It is. It is. What else? Give us some. I'm intrigued now. There's 101 things that you thought you knew. So let me think. I'm trying to think of some things I can ask.
Well, here's some. Is there anything from the movie, James Cameron's movie, that because I've heard that it is pretty close to accurate, but is there anything in the movie other than the relationship between Jack and Rose and the door and all that that is a little over dramatized or incorrect to what happened on the ship?
Sure. I mean, obviously the whole sort of shooting thing where, Cal is trying to pursue Jack around the place with a gun and things like that, and then, leaving the diamond in the pocket and then having to go down and into the purser's office. All of that stuff is all very good fun Hollywood storytelling. But what fascinates me about Titanic is that the truth that night of what really happened, I think, is more dramatic even than what's in the film. So, for example, you asked me, what would be something completely different from the film that actually happened, and that is that the film completely doesn't mention that there was a ship very, very nearby the Titanic all night. She was called the Californian, and people on Titanic's decks could see her lights. And one of the reasons why there was no panic on Titanic, at least until very near the end, was that people believed that this light was actually coming towards them. And in fact, frustratingly, the captain of the Californian was actually Morse lamp signaling to the Titanic to say, who are you, what's happening? And Titanic was actually Morse lamp signaling back, saying, we're the Titanic sinking, come at once. But unfortunately, because the air was so still that night, because there was ice everywhere and it created very, very still air because of how cold the sea was, it caused the air to be sort of slightly scintillating and fluctuating. And passengers noticed the stars were flashing that night. And of course, what was happening was the Morse lamp signals were actually flashing as well. And this was scrambling the messages out of the Morse.
Oh my gosh.
That's crazy. That's crazy. It's interesting.
I'll give you another one. I'll give you another one, just briefly on that. Just talking about things that don't happen in the film. So in the film, they send out the distress signal, and then the Carpathia picks it up and says, and then rushes to Titanic's aid. Fantastic. But what actually happened was even more, I think, nail-biting and dramatic, which is that Titanic was sending out this lonely distress signal to the empty air. Some ships were hearing it who were way too far away to help, but the Carpathia, who actually eventually came to the rescue, didn't pick up the distress signal at all. What she did was, her radio operator was going to bed, and he realized that Titanic had some letters waiting for her, some messages at Cape Race, which is the nearest land station to where Titanic sank. And he just telephoned Titanic to just randomly, before he went to bed, he just rang Titanic and said, hey guys, you've got some mail waiting for you at Cape Race. And they were like, whoa, what? Who are you? We're sinking. How can you not know that we're sinking? And he's like, what? You're sinking? Okay, I'm going to get there right away.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, incredible. And it's only just over 100 years ago. We forget that sailing in these seas can be very, very dangerous. And even in in recent years, there have been some tragedies. Do you think, Tim, that anything like this could possibly happen again in any way, shape, or form? To what happened?
Well, it absolutely could. It absolutely could. I mean, for example, if you look at a recent disaster that your viewers might be familiar with, the Costa Concordia disaster, she rolled over and sank in quite a short period of time, where Titanic actually stayed on an even keel for 2.5 hours. So in some senses, Titanic's hull was actually safer than modern safety of life at sea regulations actually require them to be. So she was a very safe ship. The other thing is that icebergs can't very well be detected by radar, because the amount of bounce back that you get from the objects means that it's quite unclear which things are waves, which things are icebergs. So actually the Ice Patrol which was founded because of the Titanic, does a very good job in spotting icebergs and letting shipping know which ice is coming onto the tracks across the Atlantic. So actually, I don't want to worry anyone, but you're not a whole lot safer on a modern ship than you would have been on the Titanic.
It's interesting. I just recently watched the Costa Concordia documentary, and it was kind of eerily similar to how it scraped along the hull in the way that it was dramatized in the movie. But as you say, it didn't take long, and one of the first things I recognized was as it started to turn, all these lifeboats on the other side of the ship were null and void. Can't use them once it starts. Yeah.
Well, that is a very brilliant point, and that's absolutely true. And some people say, "Oh, isn't it terrible that Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone?" Well, let me tell you, if Titanic had had enough lifeboats for everyone, she'd have needed, because of what you said correctly, she'd have needed enough lifeboats for everyone on each side of the vessel, which means she'd have needed over 60 lifeboats. And let me tell you something else. Although it took her 2 hours, 20 minutes to sink, she did not launch all the lifeboats that she had. Okay, so this idea that lots and lots more lifeboats would have saved a lot more lives is actually not true.
Yeah, wow. Interesting.
Well, everybody sees the irony in the fact that Titanic was named the unsinkable ship at the time of its maiden voyage. But do you think that whoever decided, the team that decided to put that name on the Titanic, actually believed that, or was that a marketing tool that
they actually believed it. They actually believed it. It's a great question. They actually believed it, and I can explain why. On the Sunday night, Titanic collided late on Sunday night, and she sank on Monday morning. But on the Sunday night, Captain Smith was actually boasting and chatting with passengers, and so was Thomas Andrews, who designed the Titanic, who was also on board that night, and who drowned, by the way, as well, in the sinking. He was explaining to passengers and impressing them with the fact that Titanic, which is a long ship, could actually be cut crosswise into 3 sections, and each of those 3 sections would actually float indefinitely. So they really believed they'd come up with a vessel which would not sink. And in fact, even if Titanic had a collision on one of the bulkheads, it would still be fine. And if Titanic actually had all of the 4 front compartments flooded, she would still have stayed afloat. But what they didn't think would ever happen is the kind of side-swipe disaster where over 200 feet of Titanic's hull was breached. And I'm afraid that was just outside of her design envelope. But of course, after Titanic sank, they then fitted a double hull all the way up the side of Olympic. So Olympic was probably even safer than Titanic. But not to worry you all, Titanic was a pretty safe ship and safer than modern liners.
Well, I'm still going back on a ship, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you know they're making Titanic 2? They're making Titanic 2, right? I think you guys should come with me on the maiden voyage of Titanic 2 when she leaves Southampton.
I would love to, actually.
Well, first of all, yes and yes, but so here's a question. You say the new Titanic's coming out. So is that for sure? Are they definitely building that? And yeah, is it a replica?
It's better than a replica in the sense that it looks like the Titanic from the outside, and from the inside it's very similar. But for example, she does have extra lifeboats inside the hull, which then the hull can open out to bring more lifeboats. So she is safer than Titanic, but she does look like the Titanic, and I think she's going to be very beautiful. She's being made by a company called the Blue Star Line, which is run by an Australian entrepreneur, and it's being built in China. So whether her building's been delayed now because of COVID-19, we'll have to see, but she is supposed to be having some maiden trip from Southampton to New York at some point in the next few years.
Wow.
That is awesome. Well, look, Tim, we are definitely, first of all, we're definitely going on that ship with you. That's done, and I have a request that you do not try to paint me naked while we're on the ship. Okay?
Oh, that was going to be the highlight of our trip.
No, trust me, it would not.
Please do not mention anything about a car. Let's just not even go there, okay?
We have our social wall that you can tweet about all our guests on Tad Talk. All you do is hashtag Tad Talk. There we have Tim on there, and a number of our wonderful guests, and the social wall rotates all the time. You can check it out on Twitter, simply #TadTalk. And we have had a question on there for Tim, and the question comes from Beth Chasma, and she said, did you enjoy sailing on the QE2?
Yes, very much indeed. The QE2 is an amazing vessel, and in fact, in terms of Titanic, a similar size. In fact, Titanic's about the same size as the Canberra, but I think the best thing was Queen Mary II. She is absolutely awesome, and she goes so fast as well. So I think that was probably a highlight, is the Queen Mary.
Yeah, we did that for my 60th birthday last year. Nick's my son, and my wife and Julia, my daughter-in-law, took me on the Queen Mary too, from New York to Southampton. It was great. We had a ball. How much faster than the Titanic does that ship go?
Well, actually, Titanic went faster than people think. So although the Titanic was only doing 22 knots when she hit the iceberg, which is, of course, very fast, she actually went 24 knots between where she was built in Belfast, in Ireland. She actually went 24 knots between being built in Belfast and actually getting to Southampton. And that's about 30 miles an hour. So people don't realise it, but Titanic was actually extremely fast. And I believe the Queen Mary can do about that sort of speed. So similar type of speeds.
Wow.
Incredible. We could spend all day talking about this.
I know. I do have a question that I really want to ask. So obviously, you're very passionate about all of this, and arguably the most knowledgeable in the world right now about the Titanic and the sinking and the remains and stuff like that. Do you have any memorabilia or paraphernalia from the actual Titanic itself? And if you don't, is there something specific that you would want to have in your possession?
Well, I do. I collect original photographs from the Titanic. They were glass plate negatives in those days. Just trying to look around the walls to see if I've got any examples. I've got some. So I've got one here for your viewers. This is a picture of Captain Smith when he was young. I don't know if this is actually going to work. Does that sort of work? So hang on, there we are. I can't work out.
There you go.
Nearly, there we are. So that is Captain Smith on the bridge of Titanic when he was about 35 years old. And it's those sort of things. And there's another one over here. This is a picture of the Olympic before Titanic was launched. And again, that just kind of shows you, oh, why can't I do it? Anyway. Oh, there we are. And yeah, there we go. So that gives you an idea. And this is Titanic leaving Belfast, one of the last shots of the ship going away there. So yeah, I like that. I like that sort of thing. And I think one of the most amazing things is I've actually got some of the music that the musicians played on the Titanic that night. And of course, they played actually quite cheerful music. But what people don't know is that the musicians' bodies were recovered, and actually some of the music survived in the violin case. And actually the violin survived, and I was lucky enough to be able to play the violin, or at least hold the violin, because it's no longer playable. But I was able to actually hold the violin that actually played that night as the Titanic went down. And it recently sold in Devizes in England for £1 million.
Oh my gosh.
I read that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah?
Yeah,
that's incredible.
I tell you what, as one of the world's leading experts on the Titanic, Tim, you make a lousy cameraman.
Yeah, I'm very sorry about that. I should stick to my day job. I'm going to stick to my day job. I'm going to leave the filming to you guys. I'll just do the talking.
No, this has been great. We could stay here all day, but amazing to learn on it. But I know we're going to catch up because we're all going on that cruise from Southampton on Titanic 2.
Looking forward to it. And I've actually commissioned an artist to repaint the painting on the Titanic that was above the mantelpiece. And so we've actually got two of them, one for me and one for some bidder. So what I'm hoping is that the new Titanic might buy the other painting and have it above the mantelpiece, and then we can unveil it on the maiden voyage.
Wow. How cool would that be?
Well, we'll be there to see it. So
we'll be there, cool. Go to the restaurants and have some iceberg lettuce, and then call it a night.
So, yeah. We have a question we ask every guest on TED Talk, Tim, and this is it for you. If you could spend the next 60 minutes with any two people, dead or alive, now this could be people you've known, a family, historical figures, anyone at all, and take those two people to anywhere in the world, who do you want to spend the next hour with, where are you going to go with them, and what are you going to talk about?
Well, this might be actually slightly boring because I've already bored you all about Titanic, but actually I would like to be with Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews. That is the captain of the Titanic and the designer of the Titanic. And I'd like to be over their shoulder while they were calculating that Titanic would actually sink. Because just one more fact to leave you guys with is that they didn't actually send a distress signal until 47 minutes after the collision. And I'd quite like to be on the fly in the wall during that 47 minutes, which just changed history of what those two were talking about.
Wow.
Wow, that's
Can you
amazing.
imagine?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Oof.
Yeah, I think I'd like to be on the Titanic in that 60 minutes, but maybe 62 minutes before it hit the iceberg. I think I'll get off there.
Absolutely.
Well, he said a fly on the wall. I think he meant literally, so he could just,
Yeah, off to
get out of there when he needs to.
Well, actually, do you know something? It was very calm, as you know, the Titanic sank, but the wind got up about 8 o'clock. But by that time, the lifeboats had been rescued. That's 8 o'clock in the morning. But let me tell you, if a rescue ship had not been as close as it was, then the wind would have got up, and those lifeboats would have actually been swamped quite quickly, and then there would have been no survivors from Titanic. So actually, one of the miracles is that there were any survivors at all from Titanic. She could have been a kind of Marie Celeste vessel that left on her maiden voyage and never arrived.
Wow.
It's incredible. Can you pick up your book on Amazon, Tim?
Yeah, I think people can. I've got a website called www.timmaltin.com. There's a blog on there, and people can interact, and people can also buy my books and see my films.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, we'll put that timmaltin.com link on this feed, and click on it. I'll be picking that book up for sure.
Absolutely.
This has been great. I could literally spend all day we've gone from Titanic to Tesla and everything in between. So
Absolutely right.
It's been great, Tim. Thanks for being on the show. Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure.
You
See
enjoyed
soon.
it today?
Thanks very much. Thanks. Take care.
I loved it today. I mean, I'm not just because of the movie, but because of you being such a huge fanatic of everything Titanic. It's just so amazing having someone who knows so much about it just right here being able to talk to us. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and I can't wait for the trip on Titanic too. Thanks for joining us. To everyone on TED Talk, thanks again. Thanks to all our sponsors. We will see you on the next edition of TED Talk. Be safe, everybody.